Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning. Welcome to the section lecture of this week. We are studying the course on understanding and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we are trying to understand the scope 1 and 2 emission reduction through building design and construction. Yesterday we looked at the example of airport as a sector, as a company type, and today we are going to look at the emissions from university campuses. And in this entire week we are going to take different case studies, different types of companies or sectors in every lecture. So, today we are looking at university campuses. Quickly looking at what we did yesterday, and it is the same line of discussion that we are going to have today. So, yesterday we looked at the scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions from airports, and then we tried to understand the impact of building design and construction on these emissions through different case studies. Today we are going to do the similar exercise for a university campus. So, we are going to understand a typical university campus, the activities that go within it, and then what are the scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions for the university campus, and then looking at one of the case studies for one of certified green campuses of India. So, starting with understanding the college campuses and where the emissions in a university campus or a college campus come from. So, we see that the emissions are largely coming from these different activities. So, we have scope 1 emissions, we are having the university fleet of transport, we have certain equipments which consume the fossil fuels. So, these are the direct emissions. We also have fugitive emissions which are coming from HVAC systems. So, these are primarily the scope 1 which are commonly found in all the university campuses. In some campuses which are, for example, agricultural universities or which have their own agricultural farmland and livestock. So, there we will also have the agricultural emissions. In some cases, the university campuses which are very large may have their own on campus power plant which consumes fossil fuels, the conventional fuels. So, burning of that will also result in scope 1, which is not very common. These two types of emissions under scope 1 are not very common, but they are still found in some of the universities across the globe. But these three, university fleet, fossil fuel burning equipment, the extent and the scale may vary, and the HVAC system fugitive emissions, these are more or less common in all the universities. Now, scope 2 is largely, as we understand, is coming from the purchased electricity, and this purchased electricity is going in all university buildings, and we will see the extent of these scope 2 emissions, how much is scope 1, scope 2 and then scope 3. Scope 3 is directly financed air travel, the business related commute, commuting to and from the university campus of its students, staff and all the faculty members. So, all this is part of scope 3, and there is a larger value chain, and there are T&D losses which also go as scope 3. So, this is primarily the activities which contribute to different emission scopes for a university campus. If we look at it in detail, let us look at the scope 1 emissions. So, stationary combustion, we have already seen what are stationary combustion, but the campus sources which result in stationary combustion under scope 1. So, there may be cogeneration facilities where the generation of electricity or steam or something is happening, steam plants, the steam boilers, where now these are facilities where the fossil fuel is being burnt, the conventional fuel is being burnt. If these are run by electricity, then this electricity is going to go in scope 2. But if it is directly run, for example, we have the biomass being used as fuel. So, wood pellets are there and they are being run in the boilers or the heaters. So, then that emission is going in scope 1, but if the same boiler is run on electricity, then it is going in scope 2. But the emissions are going to be there, and of course, the conversion factors which we have already seen as part of the India GHG program, we have the GHG emission factors for different types of electricity sources. So, the numbers will vary, but the emissions are going to be there for the energy that is going to be consumed. Then we have emergency generators, which is there in almost all universities across the world. We have emergency generators. So, a lot of times in India, across the country, we would find that diesel generators are what are used as emergency generators. We also have natural gas or propane for heating and cooking, which is less in India for heating, but for cooking we have the provision of using LPG. Then we have mobile combustion, which is university fleet of cars, buses, there could be trucks or vans. There could be other maintenance equipments, for example, the gardening equipment, there could be forklifts, there could be the mowers, the grass mowers, and a lot of other equipment which may either be running on electricity. If it is on electricity, again we see that it is going in scope 2, but a lot of times it is running on diesel or petrol. Then we have agricultural emissions, as I said, is only for institutions who manage their own farms and livestock. But then the emissions coming from the activities of related to farming and agriculture plus livestock is what is going to cause us agriculture emissions, and this is scope 1. And the last one is fugitive emissions, which is the leaks in HVAC systems, chillers and refrigerators. So, these are primarily the scope 1 for campuses. Looking at scope 2, it is the electricity purchased from local utility power, and where is it going, we will see through one of the examples. But largely it is going into the buildings, because campuses have predominantly buildings as the major consumers of electricity, plus some process emissions are going to be there, where we may be having say small blast furnaces in metallurgy department, chemical laboratories in chemical and chemistry department, where the emissions from chemical reactions take place, or other kind of equipment, fire testing equipment in civil engineering or something like that. So, the processes are going to be what are going to result in scope 1 emissions, but otherwise most of the emissions are coming from this consumption of electricity that is primarily going into maintaining comfortable environment in university buildings. And scope 3 emissions are the indirect emissions that are from the value chain, the supply chain. So, this is, as we have seen, faculty and staff commuting, financed air travel, study abroad travel, waste processing, because most of the time the waste is not being processed, but it is being collected and disposed of or sent to a recycling or processing facility. So, all the emissions for collecting and processing the waste is scope 3. Paper purchasing, food investments and electricity purchase from local utility provider, the T&D losses for that. So, this is all coming under the scope 3 emissions. Now, this is a generic understanding of how much emissions are coming from which activity. So, what we have done is we have seen the different activities which give us emissions. Now, looking at the specific numbers, we see that the maximum amount of emission is coming from electricity purchased. And again I repeat, the majority of this electricity which is purchased is going into maintaining the buildings, comfortable environment within the buildings. The second highest is coming from the vehicle fleet, the fleet of vehicles that are going to be there. We also have stationary combustion, which as we saw is coming from sources such as the emergency generators, the diesel generators, or some of the processes, or cooking using LPG for cooking. Then we have a large amount of emission coming from commuting, daily commuting to the workplace from residences and business travels. We also have emissions which are coming from waste processing. So, these are the prime contributors of emissions for a university campus. If we look at the percentage wise distribution, we will see that the scope 2, as we can see from the graph, from the previous graph, is the highest, followed by together the scope 2, and under scope 3 we have commuting. So, transport and buildings are the two major emission sources for campuses is what we have to understand, plus of course processes a lot of times are beyond our control. Now, looking quickly at one of the case studies of BITS Pilani from India. So, this institute has been striving to turn itself green. It is not a certified green from day one. It is an old university, it is an old institute, but gradually they have been working towards reducing their carbon footprint and to make all the new buildings as green, and also working on their life cycle assessment. Now, taking the numbers from the case study, which is a published case study, and you can find many such similar case studies. So, scope 1, what they have included as part of scope 1 is the fuel used in campus fleet and other services. As part of scope 2, they have considered imported electricity. As part of waste, scope 3, waste, computer accessories, the capital goods, chemical and other products, commuting and business travel. The refrigerants is amount of refrigerant consumed has been added as part of scope 3, and fugitive emissions have not been taken into scope 1. Others are workshop procurements, the consumption of water, the upstream transport, food emissions. So, all of that has been taken as scope 3, and the fleet, transport fleet and the electricity consumption has been taken as scope 1 and 2 respectively. Now, if we look at the numbers, it is very interesting to see that with this given understanding of the data and the data that has been used, we see that scope 1 is significantly lower. It is a residential campus. So, the daily commute is significantly reduced for the staff, employees and the students of this campus, but the maximum amount is coming from scope 2. A large share is coming from scope 2, almost 50% of the total emissions, which is, where is it going? So, if we look at that, the major consumption of this electricity, major energy consumers are academic building, faculty housing, health club, again a building, plus of course services, student hostel and messes. So, we see that majority of the scope 2 emissions which are there, which is like 50% of the total emissions that the university reports, of that almost 75 to 80% is actually coming from buildings. All the energy that is being consumed by this institute is going in academic buildings, faculty housing, student hostels and messes, health clubs and all these different types of buildings, and then on top of that their maintenance, a lot of maintenance activity for these buildings. That is the scenario that we are looking at in campus buildings, in university campuses, and large part of this, as we understand, is going for buildings. So, if we look at that, buildings are responsible for around 50% of the emissions that are happening on the campus. We are not including the building life cycle, as we had seen in the previous week last lecture, the entire value chain of building as a product is not being included as scope 3 in these cases that we are discussing. It is only the operational energy consumption in building that we are talking about. So, we see that building design and construction has a significant role to play if we really want to reduce the emissions from university campuses. There is a lot of work that is going on, it is happening. There are a number of rating programs for green universities, for sustainable universities, and for almost more than 3 decades, scientists, researchers, they have been working on demonstrating how to reduce the carbon footprint, the energy consumption, the greenhouse gas emissions from university campuses, which itself act like small cities. They are like a complete system, a social system within itself. So, with this I hope I am able to communicate the importance of building design and construction in different sectors, and today we saw the example of university campuses. I will stop here for the day and we will attend tomorrow's lecture with another sector type or company type and see some of the case studies for the same. Thank you very much for joining me. Bye-bye.